Hi, this is Dr. Joe Green, head pastor of Antioch Assembly Church, located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Also, the founder of the 2019 movement. And I want to share a couple of thoughts with you. Recently, there was an interview with Judge Jeanine Pirro. She was on The View, and her and Whoopi Goldberg, got into a heated exchange. And at the end of the interaction, Whoopi basically shut the interview down and kicked Judge Pirro off the show. And the thing that really triggered Whoopi is when Judge Jeanine Pirro said to her that she had Trump derangement syndrome. She said the liberals have Trump derangement syndrome, or TDS for short. And I have to agree with her. You know, it's really kind of sad, especially people of color, that we are so incensed about, you know, President Donald Trump, and he's the big bad wolf. He's the enemy of black people. You know, the mainstream media has painted him to be a racist, and I like to look at facts. You know, we can't be emotional. We got to be higher level thinkers as black people. We're under attack. You know, we have been under so many different various things that have plagued our community. We got to be better equipped to not be manipulated or controlled by the powers that be. And with that being said, when we look at facts and we get out of our emotions, then we should realize that first and foremost that Donald Trump has been in the public eye for a long time. I knew about him since the 80s, probably the early 80s. You know, he has Trump Tower in New York. He has Trump Casino. He has golf resorts. You know, he had a very popular television show, The Apprentice, and so forth and so on. But yet he was never accused of being a racist until he ran for the Republican presidential nomination and won. And then, of course, they began to twist and distort things, and they called him a racist. And just want to very briefly address a couple of things. First of all, you know, the mainstream media is actually owned by the globalists. And the battle that we see here is globalism versus nationalism. And, you know, Trump is an opportunist. I think he's a capitalist. He is a person that looks out for his own best interests. He's a businessman. And that's okay, because we live in a culture, we live in America that's supposed to be based on free market capitalism. The person has the right to go out and make money. And what I've seen about President Trump isn't like against black people or white people or Hispanic people. He basically deals with people that help him to promote his agenda. So in business, when he finds people that are helping him to sell his brand or to make money, he doesn't care what color they are. And inversely, if it's somebody who's getting in his way of him succeeding in his business or his endeavors, then he comes after him. He insults them. He attacks them. He goes back and forth, and that's just his character. But the problem is that one of the age-old strategies that the powers that be have used, especially in regards to black people, is that they like to brand racism, because what happens is racism is such an emotional issue for people of color in America and for the leaning left liberals that anytime you can even vaguely attach the whole theme of racism against the people, then automatically black people shut him down. So they don't listen to anything he says and anything he does. They look at it through the lens of the assumption that he's a racist. And so, but facts matter, and we have to look at facts. So first of all, let's look at a couple of things he said. They tried to say he was against Mexicans because he wanted a border on the southern part of the United States between the United States and Mexico. And anybody with any common sense who follows anything would know for years that has been one of the illegal entryways for people that are drug smuggling and all kind of criminal activity. Many people may not know this, but a lot of the young girls who are coming across the border are being trafficked. They are actually victims of sex trafficking and rape. And so there was a report that said a lot of these young ladies are getting the Plan B pill, which if many of you may know, that's a birth control pill that keeps a woman from getting pregnant. They're giving these young girls the Plan B pill because the expectation is that they're going to be raped at some point in time in this journey. It's so dangerous. And so when you want secure borders on the southern border, it's not a knock on Mexico. It's to any country that wants to succeed and remain viable has to have secured borders in this day and age, because there's a lot of bad people out there. You know, and President Trump during the campaign, that was one of the platforms that he ran on, was secure borders. And he said a lot of these people that are coming over here illegally are not good people. They're rapists, they're murderers, they're drug smugglers. And that's a true statement. Anybody with common sense knows that that's a true statement. But because mainstream media that's owned by the global cabal and Trump is going against their strategies, their New World Order strategies. What he's doing, what they did is they took it out of context. Even in regards to MS-13, which is a very violent gang, and a lot of them come in from South America. MS-13, they murder people, they torture, rape, and abuse. They smuggle drugs, and even have been accused of being part of the human sex trafficking trade. And he called them animals. And so, of course, the liberals jumped on that and said, see, there he goes. He's anti-Mexican and calling MS-13 animals. Now, just for the record, that's not, it goes against common sense to speak that way. I mean, obviously, if you call a violent street gang animals, that doesn't mean you're against Mexicans, unless your assumption is that every person in Mexico is a part of MS-13, but that would actually be racist if you want to go by the definition. That's biased and prejudiced and bigoted. If I wanted to assume that every person from Mexico is part of a violent drug gang, street gang, then that's where the problem lies. So he said that, they jumped on that. You know, he didn't call all rapists, all Mexicans rapists or murderers. He talked about specific group of people. We all know that they are violent people that come across the border. I knew people from the Border Patrol, that were a part of the Border Patrol. A gentleman I met who was from Arizona, and he talked about the danger and the terror that they live in that area because of that very same thing: the drug smuggling, the violent street gangs, etc., etc. So that was a real thing, but the press tried to twist it and take it out of context. He wanted a Muslim ban from certain countries, and Homeland Security deemed certain countries were actually places where terrorist cells were, and they were trying to come over here illegally. So he put a travel ban, and just to show the irony of it, President Obama was the one who identified those nations, his administration. But of course, they didn't accuse him of being xenophobic or anti-Muslim. And the thing that bothers me the most is that whole ideal is because Islam, or if you're a Muslim, that's not a race. You have people that practice Islam that are from every ethnic group around. You got white Muslims, you got black Muslims, you got Asian Muslims, you got all kind of people from Islam that are part of Islam. So to ban a religion or ideology is not racism. That's just, but of course, because the average person doesn't think beyond what they're being fed, they fall for it. They just go by that. So I wanted to address a couple of things, but what I would like to say to Black America is, there's an old ancient philosophy that says the enemy of my enemy can be my ally. And so when we understand who the true enemy is to people of color, which is the global elite, they're not just the enemy of people of color, but they are the 1%ers or the half a percenters. They're actually the enemy to the rest of humanity. But of course, people of color have gotten probably the amplified version of their attacks. We've been targeted the most over recent years. And so we should understand that if that system, and see, a lot of black people start this conversation about white supremacy and how this country is based on white supremacy. So if that's the case and you really believe that, then you also have to understand that mainstream media and the global elite are part of white supremacy. So, and if they've been oppressing black people for a long time, then common sense would tell you if this system of oppression, white supremacy, is against President Trump, then he must not be a white supremacist. I mean, just common sense. But of course, common sense goes out the window because they've been very good at orchestrating a mass mind control on black people. They tap on our emotions, and there's a lot of feminine energy in the black community because a lot of our black leaders, that we don't have a lot of strong male leaders, and that feminine energy that's based on emotion. And that's not to knock women, obviously, because we understand, and biology will tell you that women are more emotional. Their brains are hardwired that they're more in tune with their emotions than men for the most part. And so we become very emotional, which is the feminine energy that we're exuding. And because of that, we don't have a lot of strong male leaders in our community that's saying, no, let's look at logic. Let's look at facts. Where's the alpha males that's going to stand on saying we're not going to get emotionally involved in this. Let's look at the actual facts before we make a decision. We don't have a lot of that. And so we have these false leaders like Maxine Waters and John Lewis and Kamala Harris and all these other people that they're actually working for the system of oppression that is meant to oppress black people, but because we're so caught up in our emotions, we think, well, they look like us, so they must be okay. President Obama, and this is not a popular sentiment, but President Obama was actually put on in his position by the system of oppression, by white supremacy, by the globalists. He was the globalist poster child for being able to push their agenda, and because he was a person with darker skin color, black people, they took the bait, hook, line, and sinker. And so a lot of times I bring up the fact that over the 8 years that he was president, he didn't do anything for blacks. He did for LGBT, for Mexicans, and for other people, but he didn't do anything for black people. And the plight of black people in America is actually worse since he's been president. The national average of unemployment has gone down, but the black unemployment rate is 2 or 3 times the national average. That was under President Obama. The wealth gap, the disparity between the wealthy, the haves and the have-nots widened during the time he was president. More people are now deemed under the poverty line since he's been president, and that adversely affects people of color more than anything. Illegal immigration statistically hurts black males more than any classification of people. But yet, because we are become low-level emotional thinkers that's prone to emotion, we ignore that fact. And now we think that President Trump is the big bad boogeyman. He's the enemy. And it's just not the case. Like I said, he's a capitalist, he's an opportunist, he's a nationalist, but he's not a globalist, which is why the globalists are fighting against him. There's a scripture in Deuteronomy, I think it's around Deuteronomy 16, and when Moses was bringing the children of Israel out of bondage, and he got to a place where they started to grumble and complain. And in this particular set of verses, their complaint was, why did you bring us out of Egypt? Now, Egypt represents bondage. It represented slavery and all those other things, negative things. They were oppressed while they were in Egypt. One of the biggest complaints they had was, why did you bring us out of Egypt? Because at least we got to eat for free. We got to eat onions and lentils for free. And so it's this mindset of the food of your captivity, or the food of your bondage, that you are more interested in something that's free than freedom. So I'm going to say that again. We become more interested in what's free than our freedom. And personally, I would rather own a shack than be in prison in a luxury suite. I would rather own, as long as it's mine, as long as I have the freedom to do what I wanted to do. See, America is only supposed to be the land of opportunity. It's not supposed to be the land of handouts. And what happens is, whenever you give people free stuff, then you are basically putting them in a obligatory position. So they're basically obligated to you. And that's what they did. So, from the time of slavery, there were laws put in place to oppress black people. And then Jim Crow and the Negro codes, there were laws in place that were able to oppress people of color. And so after they lost that grip, after they could no longer legally oppress us with the civil rights movement, and that moved out of that, they came up with a strategy to keep us in mental oppression. And so the war on poverty, the welfare state, the LBJ created, actually was more detrimental to black people than anybody. And I'm talking about statistics. I'm talking about facts. Because instead of depending on ourselves and our own culture and building our own community, we now gave up that independence to be dependent on the government. And that was the strategy. That was the purpose behind that. It's a type of a psychological operation. And so what happens is, the liberal Democrats are the ones that push that agenda, which got black people loyal to the liberals and the Democrats. But it puts you in a position that you never can become independent. You can never be on your own. You're always dependent on that system. And so we have third and fourth generation of people that are dependent on that governmental system. But that's how it was orchestrated. It wasn't orchestrated to help you temporarily. It was orchestrated to keep you in bondage, which is why the black family is weaker than it's ever been. We're more dependent on the government than we've ever been. And we have less black businesses and black leaders in our community. And all the black leaders that we have, believe it or not, have been put in power by the power structure, the oppressive power structure. And so this whole mentality of this Trump derangement syndrome that's orchestrated by the system of oppression that has oppressed us for a long time is the one that's telling us to be angry and infuriated against President Trump. He's the big bad boogeyman. So all these black boys that were getting shot and on CNN while President Obama was the president, that wasn't a big deal. The high incarceration rate. Black people have one of the highest incarceration rate. Black males are the highest incarcerated group of people in the world, bar none. America has the largest amount of people in prison, and black males are the largest percentage of that. So black males are the largest incarcerated group of people in the world, black males. And so President Obama had the opportunity, didn't do anything about it. President Trump is having forums where he's inviting black leaders to come in and talk about these issues, but because of this Trump derangement syndrome, they won't even go sit down and talk with him. And think about how clever and deceptive the plan is. When he became president, he called for meetings of black leaders. All the black leaders said, I'm not coming to meet with you. I don't want to talk to you. And so then they refused to go talk to him. And then they turn around on the other hand and say he doesn't care anything about our community. See, that's the trick of the devil. I'm just going to say that straight up. So these John Lewises, these Maxine Waters, these Kamala Harrises, these D.L. Hugleys, all these people that are supposed to be voices of black people, they're actually sellouts because they're working for the system of oppression that has kept us oppressed. Because at the end of the day, if you think somebody's a racist or not, if they invite you to sit down and talk with them and they're obligated to listen to you and you don't go, it's your fault. You can't blame anybody but yourself. And so that's where we're at. We have to get out of this mindset. We got to get out of this Trump derangement syndrome. We have to step our game up, black people, and stop falling for the same strategies we've been falling for 50 years. Nothing has changed. It's actually gotten worse, and we're still blaming somebody else. You know, the NFL protests. The NFL protests is, I think it's a distraction. And the reason it's a distraction, you got all these high-paid athletes that are kneeling at the national anthem, but Colin Kaepernick and the rest of them said that they're protesting police brutality against people of color. Now let's have a common sense moment here for a second. If I was a high-paid, high-profile athlete, and that high-profile, highly paid athlete wants something done, if I was upset about police brutality, why wouldn't I go to the mayor or the police force, the police chief of the police force that's violating this? Why wouldn't I do that? That's common sense. See, most of the time we're so caught up in our emotions, we don't even use common sense, because think about these owners. The reason these owners are pushing back is because they're affecting their product. They're making millions and billions of dollars because they have, and 80% of the males that come to 80% of the people that come to the football games are white males. 70% of the athletes are African Americans. So this is a place where you don't see that racism. The reason they have these high-paid athletes is because of their performance on the field. So if there was racism, then they would ignore the performance, and then they would only put white people in place of these huge contracts. But because this is a place where it's merit-based, and if you can run faster than the next guy, if you can throw better, if you can catch, if you can run and tackle and all that other stuff, then you get promoted in the NBA. If you can jump higher, if you can shoot better, they give you the big contracts. The highest paid athletes in the NBA are black. And so if we have this platform and we really want to protest, why don't we protest in the right place? Why don't we use our time and our energy and our resources where they should be given? You know, if I lived in Chicago and and I say that they target black males or people of color, if they're very biased and prejudiced against them, why wouldn't I go to the police chief of the Chicago City Police Force? Why wouldn't I go to the mayor of Chicago? I mean, that's only common sense, people. And if I have that type of platform, the whole world was watching these players every Sunday. They have a huge audience. They have the influence. They have the resources. They have a voice. What if the whole team went to go to the police station and say, look, we're going to have an open forum, and we're going to say every time a cop does something they're not supposed to, we're going to shine the spotlight on them, so we're going to stop this. Why wouldn't they do that? You know why? Because that would solve the problem. And because the system of oppression wants to distract us and get us based on our emotions, they don't want to solve the problem. These people that you know, a lot of times they've called them race card pimps. And that's what they are, because they always want to stir up the problem, but they never want to get to the solution. They never want to look at the real solution. If I'm in Baltimore and, you know, the Baltimore Ravens, who, you know, also participated in this, if there's violence towards minorities in Baltimore, Why wouldn't they go to the police force? Why wouldn't they go to the mayor? Why wouldn't they actually go to where the problem is to try to solve the problem? Why didn't they go in the communities where these things are happening? But instead, they go on Sunday morning and they start to protest in a place where there's very little racism. That racism doesn't exist that much in the NFL because 80% of the NBA, 70% of the NFL are black. You know, and they make a lot more than the average person. And I say I would feel some kind of a way. Let me say this. If I was a middle-class white person, don't make a whole lot of money, you know, pretty decent salary, and I'm trying to take my family to the game, and, you know, these black players, I love these, it's my team, you know, like, for instance, if Colin Kaepernick was my guy, right, I'm a white guy, I like the San Francisco 49ers, and Colin Kaepernick's my guy. I bought my son a Colin Kaepernick jersey for $60 or $80. I spent all this money to go to the game because I really like how he plays, and he's my guy. Then I get to the game, and he's there protesting how unfair life is. His contract, the one contract he signed, was worth over $100 million. And I'm making $50,000 a year. But you're telling me how unfair life is. So I'm not saying that there's not an issue, but what I'm saying is you gotta plan. You gotta begin with the end in mind. What is your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? And use that in an area where it's going to be effective. You're wasting your energy and wasting your voice when you are ineffective. And so what happens, and what has happened traditionally, is now you're going to get disenfranchisement. You're going to get people that are disengaged because every year we talk about the same thing, but nothing ever changes. And the reason it doesn't change is because it's not supposed to change. The people that are becoming or put up as the voice of the black community are actually working for the system of oppression that we say that we're fighting against. And so somebody comes along who's challenging that system of oppression, and what do black people do? They protest him. He's racist. We don't want to hear anything he has to say. And every time he tries to do something, we try to block it. And then we start throwing Obama. Well, when he was in office, they criticized him. Let me tell you something. That's a lie. They didn't criticize him nearly as much. There was never the amount of disrespect towards a person in general as I've seen against President Trump. I'm 51 years old. I've never seen anybody in Hollywood stand up and say F Obama like they did for Trump. I've never seen anybody take a head up. I'm not saying that individuals didn't do stuff. You always got individuals, they'll say anything. But I'm saying as a collective. Robert De Niro got up and gave the president the middle finger, and Hollywood applauded him like he was a hero. You know, you have these Maxine Waters and all these other people telling, you know, if a person's conservative, you need to be disrespectful to them. And I'm paraphrasing. You know, I heard a story, interview these two young black people that because they were conservatives, an Uber driver said, "I won't give you a ride." And then they turn around and call Trump a fascist. That's what fascism looks like. Fascism looks to tell you you don't have a right to your opinion. If you have a opinion that differs from me, then I'm going to shut you down. I'm going to be violent. I'm not going to serve you in my restaurant. I'm not going to drive you in my Uber, which I have to make a living doing. That's what fascism looks like. It's shutting people's opinions down and telling people how they should express themselves. And so, you know, I just want us black people, and here's the other issue, and then I'm going to bring this to a close. One of the other biggest issues is we have to be mature. See, we're very immature. We become immature, emotional, lower-level thinkers. And what do I mean by that? Because an immature person wants their way. And what do I mean by that? And most people want their way. But, for instance, a mature person wants things to be done fairly, not just have their way. And what I mean by that is these liberal leftists, and whether it's black people or liberal leftists, they want to shut down opposing viewpoints. If you are pro-biblical marriage and you're not for gay marriage, then they feel like it's okay to be violent or aggressive towards you. But they're saying that now because they're in a place of, you know, they have the politically correct position. But when the opposing ideology was the more prominent one, they wanted everybody to be open-minded. So you want to people be open-minded when you're in a subversive position, when you're you know, below someone else. But then once you get in a superior position, now you don't think it should be open-minded. That's immaturity. That's what a child would do. That's the mind of a child. You're right. They want their way. You know, if you go to the playground, and when we were kids, we play basketball. And the little kid whose ball it was, if he didn't get to play or if the rules didn't go his way, he'd take his ball and go home. And that's what we do nowadays. The ideology is, on these college campuses, these conservative people go to speak and they riot there and they shut them down. That's immature. It's a regressive mindset that it's a low-level emotional thinking process that is only going to lead to a bad place. And so I want us as a people to elevate our thinking, to not to take the narrative that's been given to us. Don't just listen to what they tell you is right or wrong, but begin to start to think. Be a deeper thinker. Start to look at things, from a historical standpoint. We're foolish if we say, I trust the FBI and the CIA, because historically, they've been a big enemy to the civil rights movement and people of color. It's recorded, it's documented. J. Edgar Hoover had this thing where he said, we're going to identify the next possible black messiah, and if he and his black messianic figure, we're going to try to blackmail him. We're going to find something about him. And he says, because the only one that's going to be raised up from now on is the one that we put in place. And so that's what we see. And so we have to have our mind open. We have to know the history of what's happened. We also got to look beyond the surface. And so, again, this has been Dr. Joe Green, head pastor of Antioch Assembly, 2019 movement. Be blessed.